I discovered the truth about my family's struggles and the journey that changed us. Reddit stories. It all started on a day that seemed like any other. The sun was casting its warm golden rays through the windows, illuminating the quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped in the distance. The sound of a lawnmower echoed from the yard next door, and everything in the world seemed to be in its place. The Morgan family, once a beacon of happiness, sat around the dinner table. The laughter and chatter that had once filled the house now replaced with an uncomfortable silence. The cracks that had been slowly forming over the years were now impossible to ignore. It was the dinner after the birthday party, an event that had once been the highlight of the year for everyone. A celebration of life, laughter, and togetherness, where the house was filled with friends, family, and joy. But not this year. This year, the laughter was forced, the smiles strained, and the once cherished traditions felt hollow. The centerpiece of the table, a large, beautifully decorated cake, seemed like a mockery of the happiness it was supposed to represent. The air felt thick, as if something unspoken was hanging in the room, just waiting to be addressed. Rachel Morgan, the matriarch of the family, sat at the head of the table, her eyes scanning the faces of her 3 children, each of them looking anywhere but at her. Her husband, Greg, sat next to her, fiddling with his fork, pretending to be engrossed in his meal, but everyone knew it was just an act. Rachel could feel the weight of the unspoken words, the tension that had been building for months now. She had tried to ignore it, to push it aside, but she could no longer pretend that everything was fine. "You know," Rachel said, her voice breaking the silence, "I always thought family was supposed to be the one thing that never changes, that no matter what happens, we stick together." Her voice wavered, and she quickly cleared her throat. "But it feels like we're drifting apart. Each of us is hiding something from the others, and it's like we're all just pretending to be okay." Greg, who had been avoiding her gaze, finally looked up, his eyes tired and sad. He sighed, a deep, resigned sound that echoed in the stillness of the room. "Rachel, we've been through a lot. It's not just about us anymore. It's about the kids, and the way things have been. It's complicated." Rachel's heart sank at his words. She had hoped for more, a sign that her husband understood the depth of what was happening to their family. Instead, she was met with indifference. Her eyes moved to their children, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Olivia, their eldest daughter, sat in silence, her hands wrapped tightly around the edge of her plate. Ben, the middle child, was absent-mindedly pushing his food around with his fork, his eyes focused on the plate in front of him, but never meeting anyone else's gaze. And then there was Emily, the youngest, who seemed to have checked out entirely. Her attention glued to her phone, her thumbs moving frantically over the screen. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine," Rachel continued, her voice soft but steady. "This house used to be filled with laughter, with love. But now it feels empty. We don't even talk to each other anymore." Ben finally spoke up, his voice a mix of frustration and sadness. "What's the point, Mom? You don't listen to us. You just want everything to be perfect, and when it's not, you get upset. And then you turn it into this big thing." His words were sharp, but there was a pain in his eyes that Rachel couldn't ignore. Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Olivia, who had been unusually quiet, chimed in. "It's not just you, Mom, it's everyone. Dad's never here, Ben's always sulking, and Emily. Well, Emily is just lost in her own world." She let out a breath, her voice trembling as she added, "We're all broken, and it's like nobody cares enough to fix it." The words hit Rachel like a slap in the face, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. The truth was out in the open now. They were all broken, and they all knew it. She had spent so long trying to hold everything together, trying to keep up the illusion of a perfect family, that she had forgotten to ask the most important question. What did her children need from her? What did her family need? Greg stood up, suddenly growing tense. "Olivia."
"That's enough,"
he barked. You don't know what you're talking about. This isn't helping anyone." His voice was rising, the edge of anger creeping in, but Rachel could see the vulnerability underneath it. They were both on the same sinking ship, and they both knew it. "Maybe it's time we all stop pretending." Olivia shot back, her voice shaking but resolute. "Maybe it's time we admit that we're not a family anymore. We're just strangers who happen to live under the same roof." Rachel felt her chest tighten as she fought to hold back tears. It wasn't true, was it? They weren't strangers. They couldn't be. She refused to believe it. But as she looked around the table, at the three people she had loved and raised, she wasn't so sure anymore. Was it too late to fix what had been broken? Could they ever find their way back to the family they once were? As if on cue, Emily, who had been silent throughout the conversation, looked up from her phone. Her eyes were glassy, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke. "I know what's going on. I know about Dad's affair. I know about Mom's drinking problem. And I know about Ben's anger issues." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And I also know that none of us are okay." Not really. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of Emily's confession hanging over them all like a thick fog. Rachel's heart dropped to her stomach, and Greg's face turned pale. Ben's hand trembled as he set his fork down, and Olivia's eyes widened in shock. No one spoke for a long time. The truth was out, and it was more than any of them had bargained for. But in that moment, Rachel knew that everything had changed. There was no going back now. The family they once were was gone, replaced by a fractured group of people who had spent so long pretending that they were happy that they had forgotten how to be real with each other. They had all been hiding behind walls they had built over the years, walls made of secrets, lies, and unspoken truths. And now it was time to tear those walls down. Rachel stood up slowly, her hands trembling as she placed them on the table. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything. For not seeing you, for not listening, for not being the mother and wife you all needed." Her heart ached as she looked at her children, each one holding a piece of the puzzle she had failed to put together. Ben looked at her, his expression softer than it had been in months. "We just need to talk, Mom. We need to be honest with each other. No more secrets, no more pretending." He paused, glancing at Olivia and Emily. Maybe then we can start to fix things." Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. She had spent so long trying to protect her family from the truth, but now she realized that the only way to heal was to face it head on. They had a long road ahead of them, but maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The dinner that had started in silence ended in a quiet understanding. The first step had been taken, and for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt a glimmer of hope. It was a small step, but it was enough. The journey to rebuild their family had begun. The days that followed the dinner were heavy with uncertainty, as if the walls of the house were still reverberating from the confession, the revelations that had shattered the illusion of normalcy. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words, and though Rachel had tried her best to reach out, the wounds within the family were deep, raw, and difficult to heal. Each day felt like an emotional minefield, where one wrong word, one misplaced gesture could trigger an avalanche of old pain and unspoken grudges. Rachel tried her best to approach her children individually, but the lines of communication remained tangled. Olivia was the hardest to reach. Her eldest daughter, once the most open and loving, now carried a wall of hurt and bitterness that Rachel couldn't break down. Ben was somewhere in between, caught in a whirlwind of anger and resentment that he didn't fully understand himself. Emily, however, seemed to have withdrawn entirely into herself. She wasn't the same carefree, bubbly child she once was. Instead, she spent most of her time alone in her room, her eyes glued to her phone screen, rarely engaging with anyone. Despite their efforts, there was a sense that they were all speaking different languages, each trying to make sense of their own pain, but none of them truly understanding the others. Rachel found herself pacing the house late at night, staring out of the window at the empty street below, wondering where it had all gone wrong. She had spent so many years focused on keeping everything together, on maintaining the appearance of a perfect family, that she had neglected the most important thing of all, the emotional connection between them. She had been blind to the cracks that had formed in her marriage, in her relationship with her children, and now those cracks had become chasms. One evening, after another long day of half-hearted attempts at communication, Rachel found herself sitting alone in the living room, staring at the family photos that lined the walls. There was a time, not so long ago, when this house was filled with the sound of laughter and the bustle of family life. She remembered the weekend trips they used to take, the simple joy of a Saturday morning spent baking pancakes, and the way her children's faces would light up when she handed them their favorite treats. But those memories seemed so far away now, distant and unattainable, as if they belonged to another life, another family. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Greg standing in the doorway, his face worn with exhaustion. He had been distant for so long, always buried in his work or distracted by something else. But tonight there was something different about him. He didn't look angry or frustrated, just tired. The kind of tired that came from years of pretending, of holding everything together when all he really wanted was to break free. "You're still up," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I don't know what to do anymore, Greg. It's like we're all just lost. How do we come back from this?" Greg hesitated, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I don't know either," he admitted. "I wish I could say I have the answers, but I don't. All I know is that we've both let things slip for a long time. We've been so focused on keeping up appearances, keeping up with the world, that we lost sight of what mattered most. Our family, our connection." Rachel's heart sank at his words. She had always known that their marriage was fragile, but she had never fully understood how fragile until now. She had been so focused on being the perfect mother, the perfect wife, that she had neglected the most important relationship of all, the one between her and Greg. "I know," she whispered, "but it's not just us anymore, Greg. The kids, they're hurting too. I've seen the way they've changed, the way they've closed themselves off. I don't know how to fix this." Greg sat down beside her on the couch, his presence surprisingly comforting. "Maybe we need to start with ourselves," he said. "Maybe we need to stop pretending, stop trying to be something we're not, and just be real with each other. Maybe we need to admit that we've both failed, but we're still here. We still have a chance to fix things if we're willing to try." Rachel looked at him, her heart aching. "I want to believe that. I really do." The sound of footsteps interrupted them once again, this time coming from the stairs. It was Olivia, her face etched with frustration and confusion. She stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, staring at her parents, before slowly making her way down to join them. "I don't know if I can do this," Olivia said quietly, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I don't know if I can just forget everything that's happened. You're both acting like everything is fine, like we can just pretend that all of this is behind us, but I can't do that. I'm not going to pretend anymore." Rachel felt her heart break as she looked at her daughter. She had spent so many years trying to protect Olivia from the truth, trying to shield her from the realities of their troubled marriage. But now, it was clear that Olivia had seen through the facade long ago. "Olivia," Rachel whispered, reaching out for her daughter's hand. "I know we've let you down. I know we've failed you, and I'm so sorry. But please, we can't fix this on our own. We need to do it together. We need to be a family again." Olivia shook her head, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. "I don't even know who we are anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "You say you want to fix things, but I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were." The words hung in the air, heavy and painful. Rachel had always believed that time could heal all wounds, that with enough love and effort, their family could bounce back from anything. But now, she wasn't so sure. How could they fix what was broken when none of them even knew where to start? Greg stood up and walked over to Olivia, his voice soft and filled with regret. "We can't go back, Olivia," he said gently. "But maybe we don't need to. Maybe we need to build something new, something real. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But if we're willing to try, we can make something better. We can make it work." Olivia didn't say anything for a long moment. The silence between them was thick, as if the weight of the past few months was too heavy to bear. But then, slowly, Olivia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet. But I'll try. For the sake of this family, I'll try." Rachel felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. It wasn't a guarantee, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But maybe, just maybe, they were on the right path. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be setbacks along the way. But for the first time in a long while, Rachel felt like there was a chance to rebuild, to heal, to make their family whole again. As the night stretched on, they sat together in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts but united by the one thing that had always been their anchor: love. It was a love that had been tested, bruised, and broken, but it was still there. And that, Rachel thought, was a start. The next few weeks were an emotional roller coaster. Rachel had always thought that healing was a linear process, something that would eventually bring them back to where they had been, a family full of love and laughter. But the reality was much more complicated. The healing process wasn't smooth. It was jagged, filled with setbacks, painful moments, and long stretches of silence. There were days when it felt like progress was being made, only for it to all unravel in an instant. But despite the uncertainty, Rachel held on to one thought. Each small step was still a step forward. One afternoon, Greg came home early from work. Rachel noticed a slight shift in his behavior. He seemed less distant, less withdrawn, as if the weight of the world had lifted just a little. She had seen him trying harder in the past week, trying to reconnect with her, trying to talk to the kids more, trying to be present in the way he hadn't been in a long time. It was progress, but it didn't erase the cracks in their relationship, and Rachel knew it would take more than effort to repair the damage that had been done. "How was your day?" she asked as he dropped his briefcase by the door. Greg ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "It was long, but okay. I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about. The kids, our marriage. I want to make things right, Rachel. I know I haven't been the husband and father I should have been, and I'm sorry for that." Rachel stood up from the couch, walking over to him. She placed a hand on his arm, her eyes searching his. "Greg, we can't keep apologizing to each other. We need to act on these words. We need to start showing the kids that we're really trying, that we can change." He nodded, but Rachel could see the hesitation in his eyes. It wasn't that he didn't want to change. It was just that the weight of their past was still there, heavy and looming, like a cloud they couldn't escape. The silence between them was interrupted by a knock on the door. Rachel froze for a moment before walking over to answer it. She opened the door to find Olivia standing on the porch, her arms crossed, looking more grown up than Rachel remembered. There was a tension in her posture, a defensive energy that Rachel knew all too well. Her eldest daughter had always been a fiercely independent spirit, but recently it seemed that independence had turned into something else. Shield, a wall between them. "Olivia, hey," Rachel said, her voice warm but cautious. Olivia didn't return the smile. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the wind rustling the leaves in the yard. It was a tone Rachel hadn't heard in a while, one that suggested something was weighing heavily on her daughter's mind. Rachel glanced back at Greg, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. She stepped aside, motioning for Olivia to come in. Of course, sweetheart. What's going on? As Olivia walked into the living room, Rachel noticed the subtle tension in her daughter's shoulders, the way she kept her eyes on the ground, avoiding direct eye contact. It wasn't the usual confident Olivia that Rachel was used to seeing, and it made her worry. "Mom?" Olivia began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been thinking a lot lately about everything. About you and Dad, about us as a family. And I know I've been angry, I know I've been distant, but it's not just because of what happened between you two." She paused, her breath catching in her throat. "It's because I feel like I don't belong anymore. I feel like we've all changed so much, and I'm stuck in the middle of it." But Rachel's heart sank as she heard the pain in Olivia's words. She had known her daughter was struggling, but hearing it out loud made the reality hit harder than she expected. "Olivia, you belong here," Rachel said softly, walking closer to her daughter. "This family is still your family. We may be going through a rough patch, but we're still a team, and that will never change. No matter how difficult things get, you're not alone in this." Olivia's eyes finally met her mother's, and for a brief moment, Rachel saw the vulnerability that had been hidden behind the walls Olivia had built. I don't know how to fix things, Mom. I don't know how to make everything okay again. I feel like no matter what we do, it's never going to be the same." Rachel reached out and pulled Olivia into an embrace. She held her daughter close, feeling the weight of her words settle between them. "We're not trying to go back to what we were, Olivia. We're trying to build something new. It might not be easy, and it might not be perfect, but we'll take it one step at a time, together." Olivia didn't say anything for a moment, but Rachel felt the slight easing of her tension as she held her daughter, as if the simple act of being present, of showing her that she wasn't alone, was enough to begin healing the rift. When they pulled apart, Olivia looked at her with a small, uncertain smile. "I'm willing to try. I need to know you're really here, Mom. You and Dad. I need to see that you're not just doing this for show, but that you're really working on it." Rachel nodded, her heart aching with the weight of Olivia's request. "We will, Olivia. We'll show you. I promised, Da." The next few days passed in a blur of small conversations, attempts at reconnection, and moments of silence. Ben, who had been the most distant of them all, began to open up in ways that Rachel hadn't expected. He started spending more time with her, sharing his thoughts about school, his frustrations with his friends, and even the things he was passionate about. It wasn't a full reconciliation, not yet, but it was something. Something that gave Rachel hope that they could get through this together. Greg, too, seemed to be trying harder. He began coming home earlier from work, offering to help around the house more, and making a conscious effort to spend time with each of the kids individually. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension, but Rachel could feel a shift in their dynamic. The air between them, once thick with unspoken resentment, had begun to clear, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like they were all moving in the same direction. But there was one more hurdle to cross. Emily. Rachel hadn't been able to get through to her youngest daughter. Emily had become more and more withdrawn, more consumed by her phone and her social media world, and less interested in engaging with anyone in the family. Rachel had tried reaching out, but every time she did, Emily pulled away further. One evening, Rachel found herself sitting alone in the kitchen, sipping her tea, when Emily walked in. She didn't say anything at first, just stood by the door, her eyes downcast, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her hoodie. "Emily," Rachel said gently, her voice soft but filled with concern, "can we talk?" Emily hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. She walked over to the table and sat down, still not meeting her mother's gaze. "I know things have been hard," Rachel said, her heart heavy with the weight of everything they had been through. "But I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I want to be here for you, to help you through whatever you're going through. Please talk to me. I'm here." For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily looked up, her eyes red, rimmed from tears she had been hiding. "I don't know how to talk to you, Mom," she whispered. "You've been so busy trying to fix everything else. You've forgotten about me." Rachel felt the sting of her daughter's words, but she didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, Emily. I should have been more present. I should have been here for you. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Emily didn't say anything else, but she slid closer to her mother, resting her head on her shoulder. It wasn't a solution, and it wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. And in that moment, Rachel knew that they were all still fighting for each other, still trying to heal, still trying to rebuild. It wasn't easy. It never would be. But for the first time in months, Rachel felt like there was a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. And for the first time in a long while, she believed that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The next few months felt like a delicate dance, each step forward accompanied by the possibility of a misstep that would send them tumbling backward. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, Rachel began to notice subtle signs that things were shifting. It wasn't dramatic, but there were moments, fleeting and quiet, where the pieces seemed to fit, where her family, once fractured beyond repair, was starting to find its rhythm again. It wasn't a perfect restoration, far from it, but it was progress, and in this new version of their family, that was enough. Rachel found herself more aware of the small moments. The casual conversations at the dinner table, the spontaneous family walks in the park, the late night chats with her children that felt genuine. The emotional distance that had hung between them for so long was slowly, steadily dissolving, replaced by a kind of tentative understanding, a recognition that their family, though changed, was still worth fighting for. Greg had become more present, not just physically but emotionally. He wasn't perfect, and they still had long ways to go, but his efforts to connect with Rachel and the kids hadn't gone unnoticed. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations of change, but the small actions, the quiet moments of reconciliation, spoke louder than words ever could. One evening, after dinner, as the family sat in the living room, Rachel could feel the warmth in the room. The children were gathered around, talking to Greg about their day, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of normalcy return to their home. It was imperfect, but it was real. "So, Ben," Rachel said, breaking into the conversation, "how's the school project coming along?" Ben looked up from his phone, his eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm that Rachel hadn't seen in ages. "It's going well," he said, his tone much lighter than it had been in recent months. "I've been working with Jake on it. It's a group thing, but it's fun. We're making a presentation about." "Well, I won't spoil it for you." Rachel smiled, grateful for the glimpse of her son's old self. "You'll have to tell me more about it. I'm sure you'll do great." "Yeah? We'll see." Ben shrugged, but the corners of his mouth lifted, betraying his excitement. Olivia, sitting across the room, watched her brother with a raised eyebrow. "Jake, huh? Is that the same Jake you were always getting into trouble with?" Ben laughed, shaking his head. "No, we're actually working together for once." "Amazing, huh?" Olivia smiled, her usual sarcasm softening. "It's good to see you working with him. Maybe you're not as bad at teamwork as you think." "Hey, I can work with anyone." Ben shot back, grinning. The old banter had returned, and for Rachel, that felt like a small victory. Emily, who had been silent up until that point, looked up from her phone, her face relaxed. "I finished the book I was reading," she announced, her voice quieter than usual, but still carrying a note of accomplishment. Rachel turned to her youngest. "Which one?" she asked, genuinely interested. Emily shrugged. "It was just something for school, but I liked it. It was about a girl who went on this journey to find her identity, and well, it was interesting." Rachel saw her daughter's eyes light up with the same passion that she had seen in her when she was younger. There was a change in Emily, a subtle but important shift that made Rachel hope for more. "That sounds really interesting, Emily." she said. "Maybe you can tell me more about it later. We could talk about it while we bake some cookies if you want." But Emily looked at her for a long moment, her lips pressing together in a thoughtful smile. "Maybe," she said, her tone softer than usual. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. For Rachel, that was a step forward. As the evening wore on, the conversations continued, each of them taking their turn in the shared space of their home. It wasn't perfect, and the underlying tension between them never fully disappeared, but they were no longer standing on opposite sides of an emotional battlefield. Slowly, they were learning to be together again. The next weekend, Rachel decided to take a bold step forward. She had been thinking about it for weeks, ever since the night she and Greg had talked about rebuilding their relationship. They needed to take the next step, something symbolic, something that would remind them of what they were fighting for. So, she planned a family trip. It wasn't anything extravagant. No expensive vacation to a far-off place, no grand excursions. It was just a weekend getaway to the small lake cabin that they had visited once when the children were younger. The place held memories. Good ones, before the cracks began to show. Rachel thought that maybe, just maybe, returning to that place would help them reconnect with the people they used to be, to remind them of the joy they had once shared. At first, Olivia had been hesitant. "You really think this is a good idea?" she had asked, clearly unsure. "I mean, what if it just makes everything worse? What if we just can't fix it?" Rachel had taken Olivia's hand and looked her in the eye. "We can't fix everything in one weekend, Olivia," she said gently. "But we can start, and that's what matters." After a little more convincing, Olivia had reluctantly agreed. Ben, too, was skeptical, but there was a spark of curiosity in his eyes that made Rachel hopeful. Emily had been the hardest to convince, but after a long discussion, she agreed to come, though Rachel could tell it wasn't her first choice. The drive to the cabin was long but peaceful. As they passed the familiar landmarks and winding roads that led to the lake, something in Rachel began to shift. There was something about this place, something about the way it felt like home, that made her believe in the possibility of change. She couldn't fix everything in one trip, but perhaps they could start fresh. Perhaps they could build new memories on the foundation of the old ones. The cabin was small but cozy, nestled in the woods with a view of the lake that stretched out into the distance. When they arrived, the air was crisp and fresh, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves filling the silence. It wasn't the same as it had been years ago. Things had changed, people had changed, but Rachel could still feel the magic of the place. They spent the next few days together, doing simple things. Fishing by the lake, playing board games, cooking meals, and taking long walks in the woods. There were moments of quiet, moments of laughter, and even moments of discomfort, but through it all, Rachel could see a subtle shift happening. They weren't all magically healed, but there was a sense of openness, of willingness to try, that hadn't been there before. On the last evening of their trip, as the sun began to set over the lake, they gathered around the fire pit outside the cabin. Greg, who had been quieter than usual throughout the trip, finally spoke up. "I think we needed this," he said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "I don't know how much we can fix in a weekend, but I think it was good for all of us to just be together, without all the distractions. I'm grateful for that." Rachel smiled softly, her heart swelling with hope. "Men, too," she said. "It's a start, right?" Olivia nodded, her eyes distant but thoughtful. "Yeah," she said quietly, "it's a start." Ben, who had been leaning back in his chair, suddenly looked up. "I think we could do this again," he said, a hint of a smile on his face. "Maybe not all the time, but yeah, it's not so bad." Emily, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up next, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I needed this, too," she said, glancing at her parents. "Maybe we're not all the way back yet, but we're not as broken as I thought we were." Rachel felt a lump form in her throat. "We're not broken," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion rising inside her. "We're just figuring it out." The fire crackled, and for a moment, everything felt right. They were far from perfect, far from healed, but for the first time in a long time, they were a family again. Not in the way they once were, not in the way they had hoped, but in a new way, one that was honest, real, and full of promise. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Rachel knew one thing for sure: she wasn't giving up on them. Not now, not ever. The journey was just beginning. The months that followed their trip to the cabin felt like an uphill battle, but Rachel found herself surprised at the subtle, gradual improvements. The family was no longer walking on eggshells, trying to avoid the landmines of old resentment. The pain was still there, but it was becoming a more distant memory, replaced by something softer, something fragile but real. Rachel wasn't sure if they were ever going to return to what they once were, but she didn't need to. She had learned that families didn't always look the same. They changed, they evolved, and that was okay. What mattered was the effort to rebuild, brick by brick, day by day. Greg was still trying. He was making more of an effort than he ever had before, attending family dinners with real engagement, asking about the kids' lives with a genuine curiosity that had been absent for years. It was in the small things. Taking the time to listen, offering to help without being asked, or making sure to spend individual time with each child, even if it was just for a few minutes a day. It wasn't perfect, but Rachel saw the shift, and for her, that was enough. Ben, too, had started to come out of his shell. His anger had been a barrier for so long, but there were signs of a slowdown. He spent less time sulking in his room, less time escaping into his phone or video games. Instead, he joined in family activities, cracked jokes at dinner, and even started talking about his future with a bit more excitement. It wasn't that he had magically let go of his anger, but he was starting to realize that his family wasn't the enemy. They were the ones who could help him through it, even if it meant being vulnerable, even if it meant admitting he didn't have it all together. Olivia, too, had found a way to soften. She was still sarcastic, still a little closed off, but she had started to participate in family events without the underlying tension. Rachel noticed that she often helped out around the house without being asked, setting the table for dinner or offering to help with the dishes. Her walls weren't gone, but they were beginning to crack, and Rachel felt a cautious optimism growing inside her. Emily, the most withdrawn of them all, had started talking more. She no longer holed herself up in her room all day, and while she was still attached to her phone, she seemed to be more present. The defiant silence had been replaced with occasional smiles, small comments, and quiet moments of connection. Rachel often caught her gazing out the window, lost in thought, but there was something different about the way Emily carried herself now. She wasn't hiding. She was slowly re-emerging. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the old wounds would surface, when words would be exchanged in anger or frustration. There were moments when the past seemed to weigh too heavily on them all, and Rachel would wonder if they were just delaying the inevitable. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. They were learning to deal with their emotions, their anger, their hurt, instead of burying it. They were learning to communicate again. One evening, as Rachel was sitting in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, Greg walked in, his face tired but soft. He leaned against the counter, watching her work, and for a moment, there was an almost surreal silence between them. "I was thinking," he said, his voice a little unsure, "about how we're doing, about what's next. We've been taking baby steps for so long. I think we need something more. Something that marks the shift, you know?" Rachel glanced up from the stove, her eyebrows furrowing in curiosity. "What do you mean?" Greg hesitated, clearly gathering his thoughts. I think we need to be honest with the kids. All of us. I think we need to have a real conversation, the kind that we've been avoiding for so long." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "A real conversation?" "Yeah," he said, his voice steady now, but with an edge of emotion. "About everything, about what happened. About where we go from here. I think they need to hear it from us, all of us. No more pretending. Rachel put down the spoon she had been stirring with and wiped her hands on a towel. She looked at him, her mind racing. The idea of sitting down with the kids and talking about everything. The drinking, the years of neglect and emotional distance, felt both terrifying and necessary. It was the conversation they had all been avoiding, but maybe it was time to stop pretending. Are we ready for that? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean, are we really ready to lay it all out there? We've been making progress, Greg, but this could set us back. Greg stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm but firm. Rachel, I know it's scary. I know it's not going to be easy, but the truth is, we can't really move forward until we face the past. We can't keep living in this half-finished place. We need to own up to everything. Not just to each other, but to our kids. They deserve to hear it from us. Rachel took a deep breath. Okay, she said softly, a mix of fear and determination in her voice. Let's do it. That evening after dinner, they gathered the family in the living room. The kids, all of them, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. There was a nervousness in the air, a subtle tension that crackled between them like static. They sat in a semi-circle, Rachel and Greg on one end, with Olivia, Ben, and Emily on the other. The TV was off, the phones were set aside, and the room was filled with an uneasy silence. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. Greg was the first to speak. He cleared his throat, glancing at Rachel, before turning to the kids. We've been avoiding this conversation for a long time, and I know it's been hard on all of you. He paused, his hands clasped together in front of him, the words coming slowly. I want to start by saying that I'm sorry. For everything. For the things I've done, the mistakes I've made. I haven't been the husband I should have been, and I haven't been the father you all deserved. Rachel reached over and took his hand, squeezing it in support. She could feel her heart beating wildly in her chest. But she had to say it too. I know. Rachel began, her voice steady despite the nerves in her stomach. I've made my own mistakes, and I've hidden behind a facade of being the perfect mother, the perfect wife. I haven't been honest with you about everything that's happened. I've tried to protect you from the truth. But I see now that I've done more harm than good. The room was silent as the words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Rachel's eyes moved to Olivia, who was staring at her with wide eyes, Ben, who looked uncomfortable but was listening intently, and Emily, whose gaze was fixed on her hands. I know you're angry, Rachel continued, her voice catching slightly. And I don't blame you. I know we've let you down. But we're here now, and we want to be better. We want to fix this. We know it's going to take time, but we're asking for your understanding, for your patience, as we figure out how to move forward. There was a long pause before Olivia spoke up, her voice a little shaky but laced with emotion. I don't know if I can forgive you yet. I don't know if I can just forget everything that's happened. She glanced at Ben, who was looking at the floor, and then at Emily, who remained quiet. But I'll try. I'll try because I think we all deserve a chance to fix this. I think we deserve to have a family again. A Ben who had been silent until now spoke up, his voice soft but clear. I don't know how to feel about this, he said. I've been angry for a long time. I've been angry at you both, at the way everything fell apart, and I don't know how to just let that go. But I hear you. I hear what you're saying. Emily finally lifted her gaze, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know either, she said, but I think we can try. Rachel's chest tightened as she looked at each of them, her children, the ones she had always tried so hard to protect. The room was filled with emotion, with unspoken truths, with hope and fear interwoven. They weren't healed, not yet. They weren't even close. But in that moment, Rachel realized that the most important thing wasn't perfection. It was the willingness to try. Greg squeezed her hand again, his voice low but steady. We're in this together. he said, "and we'll get through it, one day at a time." Rachel nodded, her heart swelling with a bittersweet sense of relief. It wasn't the perfect solution, and it wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. A real start. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like they were on the path to something better. It had been a year since that difficult, painful conversation. The night they had laid their truths bare, confronting the past and their shared mistakes. Looking back, Rachel could hardly believe how much had changed. It wasn't the dramatic transformation they had all secretly hoped for, but there was something real, something solid, building between them. It was like planting a tree in rocky soil. The roots were still fragile and the branches hadn't fully blossomed, but they were growing. Every small moment, every genuine conversation, every act of kindness was a seed that would eventually bloom into something stronger. Life had its ups and downs, and the family still faced moments of tension. There were days when the weight of their past loomed large, when the echoes of old wounds made themselves known. But for the first time in years, Rachel believed that they could weather the storm. They were a family again, fractured, imperfect, but undeniably united in their resolve to move forward. Greg, too, had undergone a transformation. He wasn't the same man who had stood at the kitchen counter a year ago, so unsure, so distant. He was more present now, more engaged in their daily lives. He and Rachel had worked hard to rebuild their relationship, brick by brick, finding their way back to each other. It wasn't perfect, and it would never be, but Rachel could see the love in his eyes again, not just for her but for the whole family. The affection, the shared laughter, the quiet moments of comfort. They all came back, slowly, like the tide creeping up the shore. Greg had also begun to take responsibility for his actions in a way that Rachel hadn't expected. It wasn't just an apology here and there. It was a constant, tangible effort to do better. It was in the way he supported Rachel, stepping up when she needed help, putting in the time to listen to the kids when they spoke, and showing them, through action, that he was committed to change. It wasn't about fixing the past, it was about moving forward, learning from the mistakes, and becoming the man Rachel had always known he could be. Ben, too, had come a long way. His anger, once a heavy cloud hanging over the family, had started to dissipate. The therapy sessions Rachel had suggested had been difficult for him at first, but over time, he'd come to understand that he didn't have to carry the weight of the past alone. He didn't have to be angry anymore. Ben had started to embrace the idea that it was okay to feel vulnerable, that it was okay to need others. Slowly but surely, he had let go of some of the walls he had built up to protect himself. He was still a teenager, still navigating the ups and downs of adolescence, but there was a newfound maturity in his approach to life. He was talking more with Rachel, more with his father, and even his sisters. The small moments, laughing at a joke, sharing a memory, even the way he was beginning to talk about his future, showed the changes that had taken place. He was becoming someone who could look at his family and see them not as a source of frustration, but as a source of strength. Olivia, with her sharp wit and protective armor, had come around too. She had always been the most guarded, the one who kept her distance out of fear of getting hurt. But over the course of the year, she began to open up in ways Rachel hadn't expected. It wasn't a sudden change, but the cracks in her defenses were becoming more visible. Olivia had started reaching out more, not just to Rachel but to the rest of the family. She had even begun to offer help when it came to family dinners, cleaning, or just sitting down to talk. Rachel knew that Olivia was still carrying a lot of pain, but she was no longer carrying it alone. There were still moments of tension between them. Olivia's sharp sarcasm, her reluctance to fully embrace the idea of change, but Rachel had learned to accept that. Healing wasn't linear, and it didn't come with an expiration date. Olivia didn't need to be perfect, and neither did the family. All they needed was the willingness to keep trying, and Rachel could see that Olivia had found that willingness, even if she wasn't always ready to admit it. Emily, the youngest, had made the most dramatic transformation of all. She was no longer the silent, withdrawn girl who had disappeared into her phone, hiding behind the walls of technology and social media. Rachel had watched Emily grow into a young woman who was beginning to understand herself in ways Rachel had hoped for. It was in the quiet moments. The way Emily now offered to help in the kitchen, the way she joined the family for walks without being asked, the way she started opening up about her dreams and fears. It wasn't a perfect change, but Emily was slowly, surely learning to trust again. It hadn't been easy, and it still wasn't. There were days when Rachel would find herself sitting in the quiet of the evening, wondering if they had truly come as far as they needed to, or if they were simply stuck in a loop of trying to fix what was broken. But then, there would be moments that made her believe that everything they had been through, the pain, the heartache, the years of hiding from the truth, had been worth it. It wasn't about perfection, not anymore. It was about the effort, the commitment, the love that had remained despite everything. One evening, as the family sat together at the dinner table, Rachel watched as they all interacted. Ben was teasing Olivia about a school project. Olivia was rolling her eyes but laughing. And Emily was talking animatedly about a new hobby she had taken up. Greg was asking about their day, genuinely engaged, and Rachel couldn't help but smile. It was in moments like this that Rachel realized just how far they had come. The house felt full again, not just of noise and laughter, but of understanding. They had a long way to go, but they were on the right track. They had learned how to listen, how to speak honestly, how to support each other without judgment. They were no longer a family divided by secrets and resentment. They were a family working together to heal, together to move forward. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Greg and Rachel sat on the couch, the quiet between them comfortable. She turned to him, her heart full of gratitude for the man he had become, and the man he was still becoming. "You know," Rachel said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "I think we're really going to be okay." Greg smiled, reaching for her hand. "I think so too," he said. "It's been a long road, but we've made it this far, together." "Bah." Rachel leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. There was still a part of her that wondered if they could truly move past everything that had happened. But in that moment, she realized that she didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know what the future held. All she needed was to believe that they were in this together, that they could face whatever came next, as long as they were honest with each other, as long as they kept trying. And for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt peace. True peace. Not the kind that came from pretending everything was perfect, but the kind that came from knowing that they were no longer living in the past. They were living in the present, with hope for the future, together. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.